afternoon. This is the Transportation Commission meeting for Monday, August 3, 2020. I have it at 3:32. Besides the live participation, is also available link. First item of business, I'll call the roll. David Ballard, present. David McKinney via Zoom.
I am here. Can you hear me?
Thank you, David. Ryan,
Present.
Walter, Steve.
Here.
Tracy Hopkins.
Here.
Stephen Lewis.
Here.
Jared.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Jared. Here. Joseph.
Here.
Luke Kavanagh. Sean Martin via Zoom. Sean Martin. We'll see. Tony Tisdale via Zoom. Ian Updike. Melissa Taysom.
Here.
Egan Updike's here.
Lisa via Zoom. Justin Price. And instead of so City Council, thank you. Second item is the adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lancaster.
I move to adopt or to approve the agenda as written.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Approval of minutes. The third item of the July 6th, 2020 minutes. Lewis?
Mr. Chairman, I did have one question on the minutes. The second page of the minutes, like page 4 of the packet, in the middle of the downtown, there's mention of median damage from delivery. I didn't recall talking, although I may have forgotten.
I think there was a brief comment that when pins were first installed, there was some turn issues with delivery trucks, but then just learning how to but you know, just a number. I think some may have slight.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any other comments. Fine.
Okay. I saw no other changes or revisions. There.
So moved.
There's second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Good. July 6 minutes. Okay. Old business item under transportation project update. Good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. So this item begins on page 8 of your packet. As per usual, I'm not going to read the entire highlight a couple of things. Maybe before I do that, we do have the city's newest, or one of the newest employees, and so she said running their school district. She now works for the city. She is our coordination plan. So she's going to be doing transportation, school district coordination, BRT, basically a lot of things to do with education. That's her background. So she's going to be actually, the vision is for her to take over this seat. We're going to give her a little bit of time to kind of acclimate herself. But here in the next couple of months, she actually is the one that updated this memo for today's meeting. So giving her bits and pieces. So probably at your next meeting, or maybe October, have her do a little bit more of a refresh, reintroduction to you all. But I wanted to just let you know that Miranda's here, largely working on school district related issues to start, but transportation is also job description. She's going to be taking on more of that time. So, anyways, and then I'll get back to the update. But I just want to thank you for being here, Miranda, and you'll see her in the future. So again, I'm not going to read everything in the memo to you today. There are a couple of things also. Page 9, so Mr. Yearsley walk in. We'll talk a little bit more about that project here. So just a high level, get the project about the scope of the project is, since I updated on this project. Brian McClure in my office, city project. I think he's going to join us with that. So there's some questions that will get myself available. We're tracking that project pretty closely. Looking at that part of it. So that'll be good to join us here in a little bit. Let's see, what else did I want to highlight for you? Fairview. Access, those types of things. So there'll be a further discussion at ACG. They've got through the presentation part, they just need to have the discussion part. So I envision that happening here in a few weeks or so. There will be more public involvement on that project here into the fall. Let's see. And so I'll provide you more updates again, as it says in the memo. You know, as I have more to report at this time, I don't have anything new to report on that project. See if there's anything else. So we do have an ITD topic a little bit later on too, that Chinden West corridor. And I will note, sorry I didn't bring this up, Mr. Chairman. She's essentially from role, so Mr. Bryan is not going to be in this case will be as the project manager for that 2026 project that's later. I think with that, I don't have anything to call out. Then the last page is 14, so 7 of the package. It's getting real close to adopting the private work plan. Again, we'll have that as a topic today. For I plan on going to that website, maybe showing interactive private work plan too. We'll talk about that. So with that, I know we have a jam-packed agenda. Be quiet for now. Stand for any questions. Transportation project update.
Questions, comments for Mr. Hood, commissioners? Okay, Miranda, Carson, thanks for joining us in a different capacity. Welcome back. Okay, transportation projects update, closed for the time being. Subcommittee update on the future role of the Transportation Commission. I'm ready. Mr. Leclerc.
Thank you, Dave. All right, so we had our last meeting was on July 8th, and our, and we continued to look at the scope of what the commission's doing, and we sort of boiled it to some categories. And what we thought would be the next best step would be to break the commission into three-member committees, subcommittees. We already have one committee, the School Transportation Committee, and we would roll into that committee some evaluation of street standards, citywide, and major capital projects that should take more focus or spend more time. And then of course any school standing stuff. So we kind of call this subcommittee our street standards subcommittee, but it also will do safe routes to schools and feedback given to capital projects as they arise with ITD and ACHD. So that's that group. A second subcommittee would be an ordinance review subcommittee. One of our concerns has been that we provide comments as these ordinances are considered, and those comments and thoughts are not incorporated into the actual ordinance by the council. And so we want to take a look at all of the transportation-related ordinances. And this committee may not last forever, but we would provide some technical feedback, definition clarification, in an attempt to improve the city's ordinances when it comes to transportation issues like brakes and speed limits and alleys and all the things that the city could conceivably govern with ordinance. And the third committee would be a development applications review subcommittee. And we're still figuring that out, and that committee would be doing a lot of reading and of applications and seeing where, if, how we want to comment on those. And so that's a third area of work we think we could assign to three members. So three committees, sort of a street standards, safe routes to school type committee, ordinance review committee, and development applications committee. For commenting purposes only, again. We don't want to slow anything down, the city's decision-making process. So that's our report. There may be more. Actually, we did flesh out what we mean by standards, kind of in our minutes. And so if anyone had a question about that, I could attempt to answer that. But we think this is the next good move, is to get us all working on these issues, to get the whole commission more involved. And we think a committee structure would be good. A secondary proposal that we have would be to have these committees meet like an hour before on Mondays, an hour before this meeting starts, and just see, what have them identify work they want to do and do that work in a workshop environment type thing. You might, scatter around in these meet rooms that are available, and so we'd work all that out if the commission wanted to do that as well. So that's the that's our report from our subcommittee. We offer that to the commission, and, we can discuss that for a moment, and then I'd be willing to create some kind of motion to get this going. So that's what I have for now.
Very good. Comments, questions for Mr. Leclerc, commissioners?
Mr. Chair, not to head off your discussion, but you need to list that as an action item in order to take action. So you can maybe direct staff to put the wheels in motion, but unfortunately you can't vote on that today.
Okay.
Ms. Kane, so, help me out a little bit. We need to renotice, for our next meeting as an action item, the
So-
adoption of a proposal of what Mr. Leclerc outlined?
Well, not necessarily. You can't take action unless it's listed as an action item under the open meetings law.
Okay,
And since it's not, it has to be a little mushier than an action.
okay.
So I don't know how to give you guidance. I think it's pretty clear, and Caleb, I think, could make things happen for you based on your consensus. It's just that you can't, make a motion and vote.
Okay, so I'm just fleshing this out. So Mr. Leclerc and Mr. Hood could get together and get the proper notice on the next meeting, and then we could take a look at Mr. Leclerc's proposal at that time.
Well, again, I don't want to stop you from discussing it, and I guess if you feel more comfortable making a motion and doing business that way, otherwise you'd have to make sort of an informal direction to staff to enact the consensus.
Okay. I wasn't trying to speed it up, I just.
Oh, no,
Okay, so.
yeah,
these
I
two
think there are
gentlemen
ways out.
We'll have further conversations, and then next month we will. All right. Thank you, Ms. Kane. Thank you, Mr. Leclerc. I appreciate the work that you've done in outlining. I look forward to moving forward, those next steps.
Okay.
Sounds good? So,
that's just the report today, and we'll put an action item on the next meeting.
very good. Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Kane, so I don't see any action items on this agenda today. What do you mean by that?
In order to take action, open. So you have a lot of reports and discussion items, kind of taking in information. And that's fine. You can do all that. If it's not listed as an action item, under the open meetings law, there's no action taken. It's prohibited.
So Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
so if an agency like ACHD is asking us, well, how should this project look, and we have a motion that passes that says, this is what we think this project should look like, this sidewalk should be 7 feet instead of 5 feet for 200 feet because of some obstruction or whatever it is, we can't do any of that? We can't provide feedback to a project?
You can provide, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, you can provide feedback. You cannot make a motion.
Mr. Leclerc, I think
All right.
if we had a bullet point along the line, formation of subcommittees, for the Transportation Commission, something along that line, I think gets us there.
Yeah, I can see us getting there, but it just seems like you ought to be able, we all agree on something, we ought to be able to say it, have some action, proceed the consensus, follow the consensus.
How did we have
and not wait a month.
Mr. Chairman, how did we get to subcommittee with, the school portion, or even the subcommittee to explore this?
I think, help me out, Mr. Lancaster, that on those, agendas, there was actually a note, about, subcommittee formation.
Mr. Chairman, you're, making me think back here, but as I recall, all of our agendas look just like this one. So it seems like this issue that, Ms. Kane has brought up is something that needs to be resolved in the city offices, I think, because all of our agendas look just like this with old business, new business, and so, you know, I don't know how to respond other than, you know, this is what we have done, and I guess you need to take it up with Mr. Baird.
Well, and we can do that. I'm sorry, I think this is a pedantic issue that I was under the impression that it was just happening all the time. So I think what I would recommend is that you just proceed as usual, and, as Mr. Lancaster said, we'll just deal with it on our end. So perhaps forget that I said anything, and we'll just deal with it on the back end. Go about your business, and I'll work with Mr. Barrett, our software, to make sure we switch to his software as well, so that make sure it's always when you need it.
Well, very good. I'm not trying to beat this up, but this is a significant, fellow commissioners, this is a significant development for this commission. And, we asked to take on a larger role. Not trying to gum up the works or slow down the process. Again, I would just suggest with some deliberation, we make sure that we have that authority to act. I dare say if the formation is not correct, or there's something that we should have done, for us to take the action and make the recommendation, rather than say, well, you can't do what you did because of something up front. I get it, but if you want to move forward, I'm up for that, or I'm good with that, but I would say that if there's some question, maybe we iron out that procedure, so we're not back here trying to uniron a mistake.
Mr. Chair, if I may. So I think it's kind of a combination of what you stated and what Commissioner LeClaire and Ms. Kane even had said. We're not at a motion point yet. We talked about amending our bylaws and doing some of that stuff. That to me is when the motion happens to amend our bylaws to recognize potentially these 3 subcommittees and those types of things. That work hasn't been done yet. To me, this is a check-in. Do you like this direction, the recommendation from this subcommittee to create these 3, 4, 5 standing subcommittees? And if so, I'll go forward with legal, with whoever else wants to be involved and come up with that. But we're not really asking you to approve that today because, again, you don't have all that information in front of you. It's the framework for that. And if you're interested in, as Commissioner LeClaire just laid out, those subcommittees, I need a head nod saying, yeah, that sounds like about what I was expecting, or no, I don't like where this is going, let's not do that. But I don't technically need a motion, just some direction.
Okay.
So, Mr. LeClaire, I think you have this executive privilege. Unless you disagree otherwise, I think we encourage or tell Mr. LeClaire to proceed and take the next step with Mr. Hood and or with legal counsel to get this framework so we can get up and running. But I think I'm very encouraged by what you've laid out. I think it answers the question. Commissioners, unless I've overstepped my bounds, we'll send him forth and let him do his job. Okay. Thank you, Mr. LeClaire.
Welcome.
Item 3, old business. New business, item 4, Meridian Police Department update.
Our microphone was, I guess. Good afternoon. It's been a pretty slow month in light of today's agenda and the robust discussion. Although, just have one update for you. We're halfway through a seatbelt enforcement emphasis with the Office of Highway Safety and Project Shift. We're emphasizing wear their seatbelt unless they be contacted actual observation rate was before and after the emphasis. And see numbers from other parts of the state, and some of those are down in the 40% range. So we're doing pretty good. And it's one of those things, when we have one of these emphasis, frankly, we don't write very many tickets because there's not a lot of people out there that are not wearing their seatbelt. Between 9 and 7% of the motoring population, which is good enough. Unless anybody has any other questions, I will obviously be around for them. Thanks.
Questions, comments for Sergeant Frazier? Very good, sir. Thank you. New business, item 5, golf carts and all-terrain vehicles on public streets. Mr. Hood.
So, Mr. Chair, I put the memo together, but as Sergeant Frazier just mentioned, I put him down as the presenter. So, I think a lot of the background information is there. So I don't know what else he may want to supplement this with. But that is something that, we wanted to get, at least have a discussion. May not be an action item today, but at least have a discussion about, again, getting some direction. Should we, further explore an amendment to city code regarding driving of golf carts and or ATVs, UTVs on public streets? There are two areas of town right now where you can do that. That's up off of Cherry Lane in the subdivision by Lakeview, and then in the retirement community near the freeway and Franklin and Eagle Road, kind of behind St. Luke's there. Touchmark is also addressed in city code, but those are the only two places where golf carts are addressed in city code currently. I will note I think it was 3 emails from the general public. They all represented, the ATVing type community to some degree or another, saying, hey, we saw this on the agenda and had some concerns. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, their comments, but I did get, again, last time I checked, I had 3 different emails from individuals that saw this on our agenda. So, again, with that kind of brief introduction to the topic, to see if it's something that you all want to take up further and address as a recommendation potentially to the city council to consider.
Mr. Hood, so procedures is today, that'd be an education session for us if we choose to come back a second time for additional, or just trying to get an idea of what program we want to envision today.
Well, again, I guess I'm putting it on here. I heard some concerns, so I that's probably a better question for Sergeant Frazier. I don't necessarily, and I don't want to say that I don't care, but I really, it's not something where I'm the one that brought this up. I haven't been personally affected by this. It's not, so I don't have a timeline. There's no urgency as far as I'm concerned. So, that's not to say it's not urgent, just I'm not the best one to answer that question.
Okay. Sergeant Frazier, thank you.
We briefly discussed this at the last meeting, and the background story here was we had been called to investigate several instances of people driving golf carts in a specific area or community, under the impression that they could do that because the golf cart retailer told them that they could. And it's kind of opened up a broader discussion because there are people driving UTVs down streets and subdivision roads and things like that as well. Many of these people are under the impression, referring to is complying with federal motor vehicle safety standards laws, talking about things like windshield wipers and windshield wiper systems, bumpers, certain, crash criteria that vehicles have to conform with. It's not practical or possible to make the UTV compliant with all of those federal motor vehicle safety standards. However, it's unclear at state level just how many of those federal motor vehicle safety standards have to be complied with for UTV. There's some areas of law that indicate that they're exempt from some of those in certain circumstances. And then there's a whole other discussion to be had about what exactly it means in the section of law deals with riding a UTV on a road other than a forest, state Department of Lands road, crossing a state highway. Just what it means when they refer to a county or city road. Road is not something that's easily definable in state statute. So what we have is a lot of citizens who are trying to do the correct thing or think that they are doing the correct thing. In some circumstances, they may be. You can't turn a UTV into a passenger car. It's not possible or practical. The question is, do you really need to? And then the greater question is, what does the city of Meridian want to do in addressing these types of concerns? As I mentioned before, the police department deals with problems like 13-year-old kids driving a golf cart down Linders to go to the gas station, people driving too fast, people driving recklessly, people driving with open containers, without a license, without insurance. All of those things are otherwise illegal anyway. Yet the greater question remains is, what capacity should people be allowed to operate in our city streets?
Okay. Questions, comments for Sergeant Frazier? Mr. Lewis?
Mr. Chairman, when this topic came up last month and this month, of course, it reminded me that we talked about this as a commission back in 2013, and a few of us were here then. At that time, it was a discussion, it was only golf carts back then, and the discussion back then was there was somebody who wanted to add to the city ordinance some areas of spurway. That was back then. But as part of that discussion 7 years ago, it was also brought up that, at least then, our city ordinance was in conflict with state code about golf carts aren't allowed on public streets, and there was a conflict, but we never took it to the next step to ask more questions about that. I'm not sure if that's still the case, if our golf cart ordinance is in conflict with state statute. That would be my question, I guess.
I don't believe it's in conflict, but there's certainly a lot of overlapping gray areas. What you have here is societally, our ordinance was developed in it's very old. There were no UTVs then riding on the street. And the golf cart issue really can't be separate and apart from UTV issue in my mind, because it's both essentially the same thing, or they have the same capacities. And whenever you start talking about lumping UTVs, ATVs, and golf carts together in some type of code, there's going to be overlap in some gray area. Any road you go down.
It's a whole bunch of gray.
Yeah. And again, where localities have been the most successful is grabbing the bull by the horns and deciding what it is they want to do. There are towns and counties in Idaho that have said you can drive a UTV as long as you meet the visions outlined in the state code. You can drive it in town, just like a car. There are cities and counties in Idaho that says you can't. Out of the box, according to one legal avenue or legal direction for operating UTV on the road, the state of Idaho says yes, you can, unless the locality says you can't. That is one very specific legal thing. There's a lot of discussion about how that template fits into Meridian, Idaho, state highways running through it on ACH.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
during that discussion that Commissioner Lewis talked about, I believe we came to the consensus that we would leave it alone and adopt state regulations for concerning, at that time, just golf carts. We didn't address UTVs, which I agree is not seeing, especially in subdivisions and stuff, so that's my recollection of that.
I agree.
Okay? Other, there was a question left there, and again, when Mr. Lewis talked about the history of that golfing community, that was also a condition of annexation, I believe, that use existed prior to it coming into the city, and so.
Lakeview.
Okay.
Lakeview was, Cherry Lane.
If we were to, Sergeant Frazier, what additional information, and I was thinking the process that this commission has followed on other issues, there's been a session where a topic is introduced, questions are raised, other information is then requested, and then there's a comeback session, if you will, or a second session. I'm assuming that this question is coming up more frequently, or you encounter the situation as it develops. Is there a next piece of information or another data I can see where the legal department, they'd be wading into a vast number of regulations, exceptions, whatnot. I was thinking about the number of thoroughfares, if you want to call them. We can call Eagle, it's a state highway.
Right.
Okay? Then Fairview, a much larger road or street. Then you trickle all the way down to these municipal lanes, just a quarter of a mile from where we sit. And I don't know if it's a function of traffic that also has to be looked at. How do you merge it in? So I'm looking at what's the next step for us.
Well, I know that, as Mr. Hood talked about, he received some input from the public. I believe was joined by a representative of the Idaho State ATV Association. I think he was intending to attend, but I assume he was there. So there are people that will want to share their opinion on the matter. I think there's a couple key next steps from my point of view. One of them is for the commission to think about the concept that state law allows a locality to designate places where you cannot ride such a vehicle, and doesn't really allow, in my opinion, and Nate and I have talked to each other about this, she could weigh in too, does not allow, in my opinion, the ability for the locality to put additional restrictions Fairview, there were dueling pamphlets about this issue. One pamphlet said one thing, another one said something that was contradictory. It's been a long-standing issue in this area. I think it's time for the commission to take a look at the best way to solve that for the community and, for the police department.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Steed?
a question for the sergeant.
Yes?
I think it was golf carts that I asked you about at the last meeting, not ATVs, but, my question for you today is the question of whether or not we conflict in city ordinance with state code aside, as the enforcement arm of the MPD, are you comfortable with the current ordinance regarding golf carts?
If that is still the intention of the city and this commission, then yes. Caveat to that is it only pertains to golf carts, and we see issues with UTVs and ATVs that kind of leaves that unchecked. The other part to that is there are people driving golf carts in subdivisions all over the city right now, going to check the mail, going to the pool, this, that, and the next thing, and it's difficult for the police department to take enforcement action with a broadsword on issues like that because people genuinely don't feel that they're in violation.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Steed?
Well, I was just trying to narrow this down to, is the question ATVs and UTVs? And can we assume that golf carts are okay, state law conflict aside? But now you're telling me that y'all have trouble enforcing even the ordinance as it's written.
Yeah, in my estimation, golf carts, ATVs, UTVs, and everything else along those lines should all be grouped into this discussion. If there's a city ordinance regarding one, it should involve the other as well. They're essentially the same thing, but semantics, right? They're capable of almost the same thing. And in town, people are using them for the same thing, which is running around a subdivision or crossing the street. A practical difference in a urban environment, golf cart.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Hopkins?
speed makes a lot of difference in them too.
Yes, golf carts usually can't go as fast.
Well, it says, I think in the ordinance, if I remember reading it right, it can't go over 15 miles an hour.
Under our current ordinance.
Yeah. So, people tend not to drive ATVs or UTVs at 15 miles an hour and under.
Sergeant, is there, and I thought on a large perspective that transportation involves all modes of moving people and freight. And the obvious, the cars, the trucks, the buses, the walkers, bicyclists. And now we are grappling with, or working with, scooters. They all seem to provide some function, they all provide a function or ability to accomplish transportation. And I'm thinking, what niche, and I want to be respectful, what niche is filled by having another type of mobile instrument out there?
Well, I think that scooters, e-bikes, personal assistive devices, and stuff like that, they're covered by pretty specific codes and ordinances as it is. ATVs are the ones that are most unchecked. They're commonly being used. There are people that want to own them, operate them, and drive them, same as a car. Much down McMillan, down U6, down Fairview, same as you would a car. And it is a issue that is coming up more and more. The police department
it does, and I'm not gonna ask you for policy decisions, or, political comments from the police department. I understand that. I was just trying to approach it from what it is that this commission can weigh in on, what information we could develop, what conversation can we head that would help you to, or help your department and the city as a whole get to decision process.
I think the collection of public comments, see what other stakeholders have to say about this, that additional information from ATHD about their legal stance on what their roadways are, the Health Commission form a good opinion on what the next step would be. So more information gathering, pulling over by the commission. I think when we began talking to city legal about this last summer, that's something that was on the radar, was recommended to bring to the commission. In my mind, there's no better group to tackle this problem at the city level. All the community at large with the issue that we're facing.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hahn?
So it seems like a big leap to try to categorize them all under a golf cart, one size fits all. In my mind, the ATV, UTV, the speeds, those modes of transportation does. I mean, you said yourself, e-bikes or e-scooters are kind of got a tailored ordinance for them. I think they got a fairly good tailored golf carts because they won't. I think an e-period, from my perspective, would be to take and add on that it's use critical in those categories as and protection that a motor vehicle which like that first new body but bumper and that kind of stuff. I thought, well, no mind, pick up brakes. Criteria, but I don't have obvious structure that meets federal standards. So that's my point of view.
That concept has merit. The only thing in my mind from an enforcement standpoint or public education is to tie a golf cart, ATV together is you would get the same license plate for all those types of vehicles, which is a restricted use plate. A little gray one, same one that you put on an ATV or UTV. You can obtain one for a golf cart. So when a citizen buys it, makes them all the same vehicle because they're all registered the same, so you must be able to do the same thing on them. You can't, practically. And according to legal infrastructure, wherever you're at, you may not be able.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lancaster?
It seems like Sergeant Fraser has outlined the need for action pretty well. And I think he's also pointed out the complexity of this. But I think this is also exactly what we are saying that we want to do. Commissioner LeClaire mentioned earlier how we want to form a subcommittee of our members to take on issues just like this. And so I think we should do that.
Well, that would be ordinance review.
Well,
Yeah.
and this would be a place where working with Sergeant Fraser, Police Department, so coordination between the commission, the police department, we can propose ordinance to our elected officials, to the city council. So I think this is exactly what we're asking to do. This is what we want to do. So I think we need to take this and run with it. It seems clear that there's bigger issues than we're going to resolve right here today, but perhaps this is the time for us to pick a few of our commissioners, get together with Sergeant Fraser, get together with city attorney's office, and work out some of the details and bring back a plan to the commission. That's how I think we should proceed with this.
You were reading my mind because I was going to ask you what your thoughts were.
Ah, very good.
One that I would add to that, Mr. Lancaster and Sergeant Frazier, is if the state legislature in any of their committees or subcommittees or work groups between sessions, if this issue has been assigned to any of those groups.
You know that, about a year after the restricted license plates became a thing, there was mass confusion caused by Parks and Rec, who said can't operate a UTV unless a locality says can. They quickly reversed that to the opposite. And unless they say can. The state legislature did address that issue. That was in 2009, I believe. This issue really only comes to larger areas. There's a lot of rural areas in the state where people want to be able to operate these. And I'm not saying that we should or shouldn't allow it in the city, but safety concern there when UTV means Fairview. We're not talking about the middle of nowhere, little amounts of traffic in a small town. Different. I don't see the legislature taking further action on that topic. And in their eyes, the issue is sufficiently resolved and sent over to local government.
Okay? So I'm just trying to, Mr. Lancaster, who would be at the table? So, police department, legal, and then a subcommittee for members from this group, so at least three seats at the table. Mr. Hood, Ms. Carson, so I can envision 4 people, at least in an initial conversation, or 4 groups of people. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I think so. Let's get together and come back with more information next month and perhaps even something actionable. I see, I'm sorry, I'm going on a tangent a little bit here. I see on Commissioner Lewis's screen that Councilman Kavanagh is here, but perhaps he has some, I'd be interested in his thoughts about, what, again, it appears there's a need for these types of vehicles to be addressed in city code. Eventually with this going to, potentially a recommendation coming from this group, go to city council, what you might say about it.
Okay. Mr. Kavanagh, you've been invited to,
Weigh in.
Thank you, Chairman Ballard, commissioners. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll have to admit that some of the commissioners that are in council chambers, it is a little hard to hear, but I did hear Commissioner Lancaster's query and happy to chime in. I think this issue kind of demonstrates what an onion it somewhat is, and I think absolutely supports the need to have the commission at least explore this and bring forth a recommendation to the city council. And perhaps maybe it's with this kind of COVID times that people are utilizing them more, or people are home more and seeing them more. But I see golf carts and the razors and gas and electric powered scooters through my neighborhood on a regular basis, as I know some other council members have. So I applaud your efforts. If that's the direction that the commission wants to head, I think it's appropriate. If the commission doesn't necessarily want to take this issue on, I do think it's something that at a later point in time, the city council is going to need to look at.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I can ask a follow-up of the councilman.
go ahead.
So, Councilman, it sounds as if I can just restate and you can confirm that the city council would be receptive to a proposed revision or new ordinance or, you know, whatever it might look like, but an ordinance proposed to the city council to act on, regarding these issues of ATV, UTV issues.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Lancaster, and I don't know if Emily Kane is still on the line, so she can correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, the short answer would be yes, is if this commission wanted to look at something that they would recommend that the city council take a look at or recommend that the city council review with some recommendations from this commission, I think that you would find a very receptive audience.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Kavanaugh.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hood?
just a couple of points of order. So obviously, Councilman Kavanaugh has joined us. I will just let you know that we've also had ex officio member Martin and Tisdale, and I don't think Mr. Updike's microphone is working. So you have everybody here for this meeting. So I just wanted to set that record straight. I will also just mention, Sergeant just mentioned David Claiborne is also on the call. So if you want to get some of that feedback today, I'm just letting you know he is available, and I'm not trying to put him on the spot to speak, but just letting you know he is on this Zoom call as was anticipated. And the last thing I wanted to do is just read to you your bylaws about subcommittees, because I think that seems to be where it's going. So, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. I'm going to read from it, but I'm not going to read the whole section. It says, needs to comply with all applicable public meeting laws and consist of at least 2 commissioners. So I think in your scenario, Chairman, you had at least 2 commissioners. And then it goes on to say, may appoint citizens or public officials to serve as members of subcommittees as well. So you mentioned Ms. Carson, myself, and again, I'm not trying to volunteer, Mr. Kavanaugh, but others or Mr. Claiborne, you can also appoint them to serve on subcommittees as well. So I just wanted to refresh your memory a little bit with your current subcommittee structure and how that operates.
Yes, well, I appreciate that, Mr. Hood, because Mr. Hood has indicated, and I did as well, I received 3 emails, one from a David Claiborne, says he's the president of the Idaho State ATV Association, so he could be a possible resource for someone to bring information to the table. Received an email from a Dustin Ballantyne. He has interest in an ordinance, and then a Wade Patrick. I appreciate those communications. So, Sergeant Frazier, moving forward, there a timeline where this group will organize and meet? I don't necessarily, putting it on you, but you were the presenter. I guess the question is, the commissioners here, if 2 want to volunteer to be on this committee, and how we want.
Mr. Chair, I would say there's certainly no exigency in whatever we do, want to do it correctly. We have a good framework and understanding. Wheels are moving towards the subcommittee routes. That's what I do to handle the situation and it will take
Ms. Kane, could I ask a question?
Yes.
Did we see your guidance, restructuring this subcommittee? Whether, I don't want to say that that's an informal conversation, but have a follow-up with you. Mr. Hood has pointed out some directions. We build a skeleton, if you will, or a framework for this committee, and then invite those members to the subcommittee. This is an item, I'm jumping ahead, that we put on the agenda.
Mr. Chair, that sounds good. I guess the one question is which commissioners would serve. I don't know if we're there yet, but that's probably the next question, is who would serve on the committee. But from a process standpoint, that does sound like a good plan.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hopkins?
before you go on any further with that thought, why, it sounds like by the next meeting, we'll have a way to follow the direction that Commissioner Leclerc laid out. And that would form the three subcommittees that would look at these three basic items, and then you could pick, if you form the other committee now, you know what I mean?
Yes.
So.
Okay, he had mentioned one of the committees be ordinance review.
Mm-hmm.
That committee could, and I take it from Mr. Hood's comment that committee could invite non-commissioned members. Ms. Kane, I think, we get the action item for the next meeting, the formation, and maybe this is not delayed, but down the road, no pun intended, that, this committee gets in place, or the three committees for the next stage. You have that in place, then that committee get with you for frameworks on September, October, and then maybe a substantive discussion in the November, December area.
That sounds good.
Okay. So, we leave this for the next item, business item next month, that we think of the, Mr. Leclerc's action item, that a committee the next meeting, and we get back for the frame, and then to this, and what information, we think. Commissioners, is that acceptable? Put that in some formal, or just go forth with that instruction?
Mr. Chairman, so I think that all sounds fine. It does sound a bit, bureaucratic and slow, I will admit. So I think I'd like to accelerate your time frame a bit and get these subcommittees going. You know, as far as how they're populated, perhaps it's appropriate for chairman and vice chairman to suggest commissioners to be assigned, I guess, to the subcommittees, or, you know, commissioners should be thinking about it. But I think, you know, what Commissioner Leclerc reported on, that group has met a couple times, and I'm a little bit chomping at the bit to get going. So, you know, my point there being only, you know, how can we move what you just said along a little bit?
Mr. Hopkins?
I'm under the understanding that after this month coming up, we should form those committees in our next. Is that right? So therefore, that very next month is.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Hood?
Go ahead.
Excuse me.
I have a comment, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me.
Okay. You know, having recently looked at our bylaws, it seems like we can form subcommittees at any time we want, and as long as we follow public meeting laws, which I think we understand fairly well about, you know, if there's a quorum, you have to give notice and all of that, and if you don't, then you don't. You know, it seems like we can make subcommittees or ad hoc committees, task force, whatever we need to at any time for any duration, you know, so, you know, let's not make it more difficult than it needs to be, but give it the, I guess, care for, you know, the importance of what we're doing, I guess.
Understood, Mr. Hood.
So, Mr. Chair, just to build on that, and that was one of the points I was gonna make. The other one is, later on in your meeting, you're gonna talk about your September meeting. So you may or may not have a September meeting, and I appreciate your comments, Mr. Chair. You kinda said September, October, November, December. So I don't know where you're gonna land on even meeting next month, so that could potentially delay those steps another month. It doesn't sound like it's super urgent, and quite frankly, this is the peak right now for this, and you're not gonna change city code. If it happens before the end of the year, that's just how it works. And yes, it's slow, bureaucratic stuff, but we need to have it in by next spring when these start to pop up again, right? I mean, that should be our goal. So I just want to point it out that, yes, your existing bylaws allow you to set a subcommittee if you want, or wait. Either way, I'm good. Just letting you know you can't do that. But your September meeting probably should play into this discussion, because that pushes it another 30 days potentially if we don't meet in September.
Very good. Mr. Lancaster, I was just, I was playing off of the premise that in the September meeting, or next meeting, we could move forward with Mr. Leclerc's plan. That ordinance committee would be a natural, if that ordinance committee wanted to take root faster than another month and work with Ms. Kane's office during September, that would address the speed, the timeliness issue. Granted that the bylaws do talk about appointing committees or making ad hoc committees, but we seem to have designated a committee that this would be a natural for. So that was my thinking there. But once that's in place, it's their schedule then that dictates, not necessarily every 30 days.
Sounds great, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so again, we'll go back, file some old ground, Mr. Leclerc. You'll be working on the action item. We'll take up whether or not we meet our September meeting. Now, in the meantime, we can give thought to who wants to. Mr. Leclerc, were you thinking people to volunteer for these groups? Or necessity given to advocate? So you may have volunteers rather than volunteers.
Yes, we didn't get that far as to how it should be selected. I think we kind of presumed that an opportunity would be given to the commissioners to volunteer for whichever subcommittee they wanted. And then if we got shorthanded, the chairman would just appoint.
Okay. All right. So Sergeant, on September or next month, we'll have it in place that we touch you and gather up in, put our plan, start working on this, who it is. Good. Very good, sir. Again, appreciate participation. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I'm not sure if you can all hear me. I would say the last 2 or 3 minutes that has come from council chambers has been very challenging to hear. I know that we've got some audio issues in that space, but I just wanted to alert you and staff about that. I don't know if there's anything we can do, but just know that if there's, I guess, calls for those of us that are, participating remotely, it may be very challenging for us to either hear the question or to be able to provide feedback.
Well, I appreciate that. That's it's always a good reminder on these Zoom meetings. Mr. Kavanaugh, appreciate that. We'll move forward. uh, getting subcommittees formed for the transportation, was the ordinance review, and first hand off to ordinance, this golf cart issue. Okay, item 5, new business. For the time being, we'll close on that. Item 6, U.S. 6 cross-section request. Mr. Hood, you got a letter on starting
17.
17.
Mm-hmm.
Give us time. Well, welcome, sir. If you'd come up to the podium and yourself, state your
Mr. Chairman, if I can interject for just a second before Mr. Walker starts, I'll just note that I won't be participating in this, this business item, so if you're, expecting my usual comments, I'll be silent on this one.
You're recusing yourself.
I am.
All right. Very good. I appreciate that. Mr. Walker?
Thank you, sir. My name is Jonathan Walker. I live at 4102 West Silver River Street. Outside one of my neighbors, Jordan Harris, who also lives in my neighborhood. Everyone in our neighborhood is kind of concerned about this issue, so we came along with it and kind of what's happening around. Please mind if I remove this mask so I talk on the microphone?
Well, sir, I'm not going to tell you can or can't disregard some guidelines. I would suggest you keep it on. And I get the challenges. I appreciate your cooperation.
I understand it's whatever works out for you guys.
All right.
So if it works best in the spirit of expediency, so I'm not just rambling on, I wrote a pretty short statement to kind of outline my concerns. Pretty short, I'll take it. Wait, so I'll just go ahead and read it then. Thank you. My name is Jonathan Walker, and I currently live on the southwestern corner of Tree Farm and Chinden Boulevard in the Bainbridge subdivision, which is a right-to-work planned neighborhood. More specifically, I live on the north side of West Silver River Street. My backyard borders the southern boundary of Chinden Boulevard, where I think as everyone knows, a large highway expansion project is underway. The concern I have come to discuss today is the absence of a noise abatement barrier between our backyards and the expanding Chinden Boulevard, which will soon be a six-lane, 55-plus mile-an-hour highway. I believe that as it currently stands, the absence of a barrier is out of compliance with the Meridian Code 11-3H4 item. Put that in the agenda for review. I think that this ordinance lays out clear and unambiguous requirements for residential areas adjoining state highways to include a minimum 10-foot high berm or barrier above the center line of the roadway. We currently do not have any barrier between our property and the highway, and if you were to travel the entirety of Chinden Boulevard, within the city limits of Meridian, all the way from West Cat Road, Holland, all the way down to Eagle Road. Our 1,000-foot stretch is the only residential area that does not already have a barrier, or currently is in the process of having one built. I've sent multiple communications to the city of Meridian regarding this concern, and I've been referred to the Idaho Transportation Department, who is responsible for the project, for a better understanding of the issue. Last week, I spoke with Ms. where the sensor was located during the study, so that the ITD owned the study no longer had to account for barrier. I believe, Idaho Transportation Department, or ITD, will further explain this action by claiming that there is no planned development where our street is now, and it was merely unzoned farming. I do not believe that to be a valid reason, as I have multiple documents that show the plans for Cambridge development were submitted to local officials back in 2013, 3 years prior to this noise study. I believe it will be ITD's position that the responsibility for the noise barrier falls to the developer to be right for because our homes were actually built after the date of public knowledge. In conclusion, I'm asking the city of Meridian to enforce the city code, determine what party is responsible for its construction, and begin measures to ensure it's built without delay. Again, as I said in all of my previous letters, I understand that a project of this magnitude is both complicated and important, but the rights of residents must be protected during these larger projects. I believe the city of Meridian is empowered through means and authority to create zoning ordinance, requiring permits to build, having legal authority to enforce this ordinance. I think that I, along with other citizens from my neighborhood, have the right to request the city of Meridian enforce code violations against these companies, just as they would against me if I violated.
Very good, Mr. Any number of issues you have. Trying to sort a few of those out. So, you currently live in a rural ground, no?
41-2 West Silver River.
Okay. All right. So you're in the subcommittee.
Oh, you got it up right here.
Okay. Shendon rebuilt. So one of your first questions is, I'm just trying, just sorting this out, and I apologize. Okay? You've got code enforcement, code interpretation.
It's very clear. I think it's very clear that nowhere else is violated along that corridor.
But it's just pardon the expression, I'm looking at timing.
I mean, I don't know if the timing is as relevant as the fact that it's not code. And I don't think that, I mean, the code was enacted in 2005. As we stand here today, and they expanded the road far wider than they did. Pretty big community, which is one issue. But it's right, that road's gonna run right next to that fence, and it's just a wood fence. You have no barrier, which is prescribed, I mean, specifically for this purpose, like residential areas. And I think it's a public health hazard not address this. Like I said, it's not like some neighborhoods have it, some don't. Every single one either has it, and if it doesn't, it's in the process of being built right now. And if I called them, they said, okay, we're gonna build yours after we built this one down by this corner. I think that's fine, but they said, no, you know, and I don't know if they'll be able to tell you today, but they purchased, so like, we purchased where that sensor was, so we didn't have to count it. I don't know if that's appropriate. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that obviously to have noise and units.
Mr. Chair, may I approach?
Yes, sir.
I think that there's a.
If you'll put, thank you.
Complicated situation, you all understand, but it goes far beyond noise. This is a safety concern as well. It's 5-inch curves separating 55-mile-per-hour highway versus our backyard. How we're situated, we're beneath the roadway. So we have a 6-foot fence, 6-foot fence, wooden fence on top of a concrete barrier holding back not only is it incredibly noisy as it is, once Costco goes in and once the roads are finalized, which they're beginning to do, it's going to increase the volume to the probably a decibel that is unenjoyable for quite reasonable enjoyment. But not only that, see, more than half the houses on this block have children. Those children, my wife's a stay-at-home mom, his wife's a stay-at-home mom, our kids are constantly in the backyard, running barrels off that highway, 55 miles per hour. There's nothing wrong. Aside from noise abatement, which obviously John's done better research on this, also safety concerns for our children. Like I said, more than half the house, large children.
And I really think it just comes down to, like I said, I think ITD's vision is that it's on the developer. That could be, I don't know, I mean, but I think it's on, this kind of falls to the city of Meridian's feet, because they're the ones that approve these permits and everything, that they need to enforce this work. And I think that I'd like to see it enforced immediately.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Steve?
Thank you, sir. A question for Mr. Hood. Does staff have a position on whether or not a wall should be built there? I'm talking about who? Based upon the city code?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Steed. Yeah, as was pointed out, I mean, city code, and what I didn't do before this meeting, I didn't prioritize it. I meant to, I had it down, is to do that research, to see if the Bainbridge project got any special accommodations through their entitlement process to not have to comply with that section of code that you've got stated in there. So without doing that research, though, on the face, to answer your question is yes, there should be a 10-foot tall fence, berm combination next to a residential project. So the part of it, too, that I guess plays in a little bit is the Bainbridge project may have put that in and it may have complied, because it does talk about it being concrete, stucco, or other appropriate sound attenuating material. So I don't know if it's wood, what was provided to say that it's essentially the same as a stucco. Again, I just haven't done a lot of homework, and I'm getting way deep into answering your question. But there's a lot here. And so yes, on the face, a 10-foot wall, but the road is under reconstruction. So where was the height of the highway before the project? And Bainbridge may have gotten their occupancy here at the previous elevation, and now the road raises up. That doesn't mean that what was signed off for occupancy of these homes back then, it becomes non-conforming, but we don't typically tell the builder, well, now you need to raise your fence and berm up 2 feet because their highway is now 2 feet higher. Those are just some of the things that I don't know happened with this, but I totally agree. We need to look into this more, figure out what was reviewed and approved for the berm, fence, the 10-foot requirement that's in our code, and then see if there's a code enforcement issue there, if it ever got signed off or not, or how it became non-conforming. But
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Steed?
Yep, thank you for that. Does anybody know who's erecting those concrete walls further down toward Linder on the older residential neighborhoods? Is ITD paying for those through the contractor?
Yes.
That's a yes? Okay. Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Steed?
I would like to hear staff's analysis of when who did what, or should have done what. I think that'll be part of what we need to know. It might help. I think I'm probably too optimistic. It might help decide if the developer should have done it and didn't, and now he needs to do it. I don't think it's going to be that easy, but I drive Chinton, and I don't believe the highway center line has changed that much. I could be wrong. Y'all could tell us. But there are a lot of issues here, like you said, Mr. Chairman, like Mr. Hood said, like the gentleman here spoke. I mean, this is a bucket of worms. But I think staff info would be a big start on helping us understand what's going on out there.
And the question then, Mr. Steed, is, well, timing, forum?
The timing has to do with when that subdivision was built. That that was still a state highway. This is just a reconstruction of it.
No, timing today. Conversation today, tomorrow, next week, next month. This gentleman has a question, and so we're acting, with all due respect, we're acting without other pieces of information to even have a conversation. We understand the issue.
Well,
And so then the question is, where does this, what can we suggest to this gentleman and to his neighbor?
if I may,
Yes, you may.
I've read the packet 4 times on this issue, and every time I've read it, I've had a different primary question. It just gets more and more interesting. I think we need information from staff to help understand the sequence of events that led up to all this. I don't see any way, it's not an action item on our agenda, which is a whole nother mess, but there's nothing really we can do today except, I believe, we can get away with asking staff to delve into this and tell us how did this come about?
Mr. Hood, is that an appropriate question?
Yeah, and again, I think that's, that is the next step.
And Ms. Kane,
Mr.
trying
Chairman.
to remember where I sit and what comments is appropriate within this forum, and stay within what the guidelines for the commission is. So I'm trying to move very carefully that I'm not committing any agencies of the city or any people of the city to perform a task. I think it's outstanding, if we are going to consider this issue, that we request some information.
Mr. Chair, I agree. I think, it sounds like Caleb is saying he could bring that to a future meeting or work with, Mr. Walker to kind of figure out where things left the tracks, or if it did at all.
Very good, because like I say, you know what I do for a living, and I want to stay within ground rules of.
Sorry, if I can. I wasn't quite sure, and I certainly could have called Mr. Walker and gotten some more clarity, but I wasn't quite sure if his request was going to be more for some more of the sound walls that were required through the state's environmental process, because, and I'm speculating here because I haven't done that research yet, but I believe that the environmental document for the widening of the state highway was done before Bainbridge existed. So largely what you see on the screen here now is, it's not what it looks like today, but that's largely what it looked like back when the environmental document was being done. So the state is not putting in or requiring the walls that they typically build. So now it's city code, because that was the Bainbridge project after that. So, but that's what I need to do, again, do my research, make sure I'm not. But we had similar conversations with the state as they were reviewing the environmental, like, residential's coming there. Can you put up a wall? Because we know there's going to be a subdivision, but it didn't exist now, so they don't consider that. They don't consider the future, maybe just coming down the line residents. You don't get the, 20-foot tall wall. You get maybe the 10-foot wall that the city code requires. So I'll lay that out, for the next meeting or whatever, and again, do that research. But I'm guessing that's what kind of happened here.
Mr. Chairman,
Get to Mr. Walker, Mr. Hopkins.
the state's here. You can get the other side of the opinion, of the information. We can hear more of the story.
Well, and I think in fairness to the state, that you present an opportunity to gather some information. And again, I'm not going to ask the representative of the state until she's had an opportunity to confer with her own staff and legal about what information they may choose to present. But I think your sentiment is well taken. Now, I can't speak for her, but if she wants to chime in, I will ask her to address your question. And I caught your first name, but not your last. Mr. Walker, we'll get back to you. Okay? Jamie Kuntz. Very good.
So due to the fact that it was approved prior to that subdivision going in, then it becomes an issue between the city of Meridian and their ordinances and the application process with the developer. Is there any wall past that? Does the wall stop then? I'm gonna assume the wall stops at, what is it, Black Cat? The wall has stopped, okay, before Costco. Should know that, I drive it all the time. Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Kuntz, if we're gonna have some more information, be appropriate to invite you back? Very good. I just wanted to respect your, the chain of command and give you an opportunity to be prepared to address questions. Very good. All right. Thank you. Mr. Walker, we're bumping up against, thank you, Ms. Kuntz. We have 20 minutes devoted to this topic. I'll give you a couple of seconds to wind up, but I think you can see that an invitation is out there to gather some information and provide another opportunity for a conversation.
And I just want to include the plans with all the maps that subdivision were submitted to the Ada County Highway District July 29th, 2013. And that is year prior. And the master declaration of the subdivision 2014. I spent the first page and some of the signature pages for the rest of them all. And my intention there would be that this was all planned and all laid out. I feel like it should have all fallen under the federal highway guidelines. I mean, I feel like they're there to protect residents from expanding highways. So that's part of the purpose of it. But I'd like to, and I'd like to know that what's the next step that I can take in this process as far as board.
So, Mr. Chair, if I can, I think, again, I wasn't quite sure what Mr. Walker's request is going to be. If it was going to be for you to support his effort to petition the state to build their wall, because there's facts that say should have been considered in the first place and it should have been a state wall, or again, if it's our codes and our requirements as the city of the Bainbridge project, that's in my court. I don't really need, it's us to enforce our own codes. If it's the former, he needs to fly that up the flagpole, the chain of command, if you will, from the Transportation Commission to the City Council to the ITD board to wherever that goes. I don't know how that works, but I can't do that if the request is going to be to make it part of the project that's going on right now with the contractors that are out there widening the state highway. So that's what, those are kind of the two requests. So again, if the request is to petition the state, that's different than me looking into if the developer is conforming with their conditions of approval for their project. So I'll enforce it, but again, I'll look into this and we'll make sure that codes are being followed. What I can't do is you know, construct a wall similar to what's on the east side of 10 Mile back that way. I mean, it's gonna be a different situation because I know that the Bainbridge project didn't propose that type of a wall berm landscape combination. So, if you're okay with either, I'll pursue the city side and our occupancy and how we got there and plan review and inspection and all that good stuff.
Mr. Walker, you had asked the question, and the commission, we can gather some information and make a recommendation. So your question, what can you do? We're gonna gather some information and look at it. Now, an overall question, and you've done some work, you've represented yourself. I'd suggest that you study the question a little further. And you have a decision to make how you want to represent yourself. How it is that you want to present your situation, sir, and who you want as a spokesperson.
Yeah, I kind of hoping that's something I can get guidance from the city about, because like I said, city order, I'm just asking, the city has power to make sure that these things go in code. I'm just asking that code, or that's all I'm asking for, and
You've asked the question, and we've offered to provide some information. And we'll gather up some information and call another, put it on our...
Mr. Chair, if I can, I don't see this coming back to you because I don't need anything necessarily from you. It is, as Mr. Walker points out, it's a city code enforcement or development requirement at this point in time. So we're just going to handle it through our normal channels, and it's not, don't be surprised if you, I'll probably let you know what the resolution is, but I don't see this being a future topic for you all. Again, the main reason I think that I thought Mr. Walker was here is he was asking you to petition the council to ask for a real wall, if you will, something other than what was required by Brighton for the Bainbridge project. So.
just want the city ordinance, that would be very good.
Very good.
I know everyone's very busy, but really taking time with some microphone.
That's why we're here, Mr. Walker. Thank you for coming in. And your name again, sir?
Jordan Harris.
Mr. Harris, thank you. All right. Item 6, US 2026. Item 7, Eagle Amity to Victory Design.
I did. I'll just pull them up from here. Yeah, thanks. There's 3, right, Stephen?
Yeah.
3.
Thank you very much. Stephen Yearsley. I am in the Subcommittee Homeowners Association. My address is 291 East Luca. Just kind of want to explain a little bit about myself. I'm a civil engineer. I've been practicing for 24 years. I've also served on, actually, this committee once before, our commission. I also served on the Planning and Zoning Commission. So I kind of understand the process, and I appreciate you allowing me to talk to you today. So ACHD is getting ready to construct a project on Eagle Road from Victory to Amity. About 2 years ago, the commissioners presented, our ACHD came out with a public involvement meeting talking about what they propose to do with Eagle Road through this section. They came up with 2
good question. Yeah. Let's jump ahead. Where would you put it?
Well, I would actually pull it, put it straight in line like with the normal crosswalk, where you cross right in front of the car, like a normal crosswalk. And that way, as you come into that intersection, you can see both individuals on either side of the street to know if they're gonna cross, so you can have a chance to slow down. You know, currently right now, I live on that street and I turn in that way. And right now, when I come into that cross, that turn, you know, so I've been watching this and looking at this, and you get pressure from the guys behind you not to slow down. You know, they're kind of creeping up on you, trying to get out of my way type situation. And then you have, you know, being able to see someone like that. I just think it's going to be a very unsafe condition. I like that's a better picture of what it looks like. You'll have a car sitting in front and with a crosswalk behind. And most times, you don't have the center island give you some space. The road that I live off of is Rome, and you don't have an island. You have just the normal width of a road. And so you don't have a lot of escape room for those pedestrians to pass. And so I think personally that it's very unsafe. And I don't know any others in here, you know, I know you dealt with these types of intersections before or not, or your thoughts? Commissioner Lewis?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Lewis?
I did do a little research prior to the meeting on this. I agree with Mr. Crossing from documents that I've read, ASTO Bicycle Facilities Guide indicates that we should have crossing street. It says for roads 50 better crossing roadways. But up where
Mr. Chairman?
We get, okay. Mr. Steed, just calling on order. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. A question for Mr. Hood. Are you aware of this type of crossing being constructed anywhere in ACHD's jurisdiction before now? This is a first proposal.
Yeah, I'm not aware, and I just looked at Brian McClure, who, again, this is the first design I've seen from ACHD that's had this design, so I'm not aware of it exists. That's not to say the county's pretty big, right? So it may exist, but I'm not aware of any.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, and I appreciate you letting me interrupt.
I was just going to say, I don't know of this being designed in Navy County as well. Yeah, so I don't believe it is. This design came out, I don't know if you are familiar with the overpass at Fulton, where they did the two different pathways, one for the bikes, one for the sidewalk. ACHD came out with both of these designs about the same time, and so my thought process was, again, this is my assumption, is they're trying something different. So this was a test case to see if it worked. However, I'm really concerned about this test case and the success of it. You know, especially when you have potential pedestrian involvement. That would be my thought. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hopkins?
On your second example, on the roundabouts,
What page?
22.
Okay.
I have seen that.
Yes.
In the county.
Yes. And the roundabout is a different subject that I'll take. It's not about the pedestrian crossing.
Okay. Right.
But I wanted to talk about two different subjects. So, I guess if there's no more questions, let's go on to the next subject.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lancaster?
so if we're hitting them by topic, I think before we get too stirred up, I'd be interested in, you know, city staff has been part of the project, and I think, yeah, Mr. Martin is on the call. you know, like the previous issue, it's nice to hear the other side of the story before we get too whipped up. So I'd be interested in hearing from Brian and Sean as far as, you know, what was involved with the project. And you know, Steve and I, we used to be sitting up here together once upon a time. That seems like a really long time ago now, Steve, but it also doesn't at the same time. So it seems like yesterday too. But yeah, I'd be interested in hearing, you know, what Brian's involvement has been in the project and what light Sean could possibly share as far as, you know, what direction ACHD is taking. If that's okay, Mr. Chairman.
If he chooses to speak.
Commissioner Lancaster, this is actually the first multi-use pathway that we've designed since we went with our bicycle matrix. We do have some of these crossings that are similar to this, not necessarily because of the pathway, but because of a canal or something that is right by the road where we have to push the crosswalk away from the road. I'm sitting in my house, and there's one right outside my house at Palatine and McMillan, where we have the canal right next to McMillan, and the crosswalk across Palatine is set back about 25 feet or so. There's another one at McMillan and Red Horse, similarly, where because of the canal, we had to push the crosswalk away from the intersection. The idea behind this one, I'm not a part of this project team, but I have talked to Tim Kearns, who is. And I guess the idea twofold on these would be, one is to get the bicyclists who may be traveling on there to slow down a little bit. Because if you do have a crosswalk that is straight across the intersection, then what happens is the bicyclists that might be going 10 or 15 miles an hour, you know, basically sometimes they will have a problem slowing down. That's one of the things we've seen. We have a multi-use pathway at Federal Way. It was one of our first ones we ever did. And one of the problems we've ever had with that one is bicyclists just come zooming down that bicycle path and they don't slow down. So that was one reason why we introduced this, was one, to get the bicyclists closed, to slow down a little bit. And two, what we've seen a lot is motorcycle or automobiles will creep past the crosswalk and the stop bar, and they will block the ped ramp. And the idea is if we can move that ped ramp further down, then if there is a car sitting there, then the pedestrian can still cross without having to either go in front of the automobile and perhaps like into Eagle Road, or have to wait for the car.
This is Alyssa Taysom from BRT. Can I say something?
Yes.
So a year ago, I was a campus planner at Montana State University, and one thing that they did along one of the multi-use pathways that had similar crossings to this is they actually put stop signs on the pathway for the cyclists and the pedestrians to stop and make sure that the pathway was clear before crossing. I don't know if that's something that's a possibility, but it is something that I've seen used and seemed to work pretty well on a heavily used trail off of campus.
We have used yield signs, like on the Federal Way pathway. We have used yield signs to at least so the bicyclist knows that there's a crossing coming up, but a lot of times that still doesn't get them to slow down.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. Yes.
Quick question. In terms of using the turn in order to slow cyclists down, is there anything preventing from essentially having two turns in the pathway, one to, you know, slow them down, and then another one to revert back to that kind of more street side position, so that way they're still not behind those cars? I feel like that might be able to accomplish it. Because I don't know that, you know, moving it back necessarily would prevent cars from blocking the pathway. So I don't know that that's necessarily a consideration as much, but in terms of slowing cyclists down, I wonder if you could just incorporate an additional turn to return to that street side location to where they're still in front of the cars and you still get the cyclists to slow down.
Commissioner Ballard, so this is something that staff did bring up repeatedly, verbally and through written comments as part of the project. My understanding of this, also via Tim Kearns, is it comes down to definitions. So this is not a bicycle facility, this is a multi-use facility, and the standards they were referencing said this was the best approach. I can't say that's the case 100%, that's just what I was told. So multi-use facility, this is how they like to handle that. Again, we brought it up, and ACHD traffic engineers decided to disagree and move forward the direction they felt was best. We'll also say this is extremely 11th hour. While I agree with the concerns in the comments, 99% is done. They are working on wrapping up 100% right now, and they are going out to bid in the next couple months here. So just keep that in mind with whatever you want to do or recommend.
Very good. Any other? We're approaching time. Mr. Yearsley, what? We're coming up against a hard break.
Okay. So the next one is at the roundabout.
And sir, before you get there, I'll have to take we'll have to get a vote of the we want to exceed a 5:30 limit.
Mr. Chairman, so moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. In response to some of those comments, you know, if you put a stop sign up, you know, if you're standing on the corner wanting to cross, if there's a car in that front of you, you can't see anybody wanting to turn until you step out from behind that car. I know they call it a multi-use path, but I don't think it's going to get somebody hit. So definition or not, or that. So I guess that's why I'm here for your opinion.
Mr. Yearsley, is this right in, right out, or can that car make a right in?
They can both make a right and left.
Okay, have you considered what happens? You got two cars making a left, right? First car gets into that subdivision, second car decides he or she can go too, and until that second car gets inside that subdivision, you're not going to see some other issues. That second car's in the lane of traffic and it seems that there's some risk here, and I'm not saying one is more tolerable than the other or preferred to the other. There's a number of factors that go into it. And, Mr. McClure, somebody made a judgment call.
That's fine. Like I said, I'm just trying to make my opinion, you know, just make my point.
Well taken.
How to make it. With regards to the roundabout, and I don't know if many people drive that road or not. Eagle Road is a good area. It's getting really busy. It's even getting worse. The growth potential south of that area is just tremendous. And from my understanding, the unit just approved 4,000 lots off of Cloverdale and Hubbard, which you know most of those lots are going to be coming this time. People that travel that route. So my opinion is that I think Eagle, this area is going to be as busy as North Eagle, just because of the amount of pedestrian, amount of homes that can be built out of that way. With roundabouts, they work best when you have equal amounts of traffic coming in at the same point. What happens is if you get more traffic in one direction, cyclists cannot enter into those roundabouts without brakes. which they're not meeting with this design. And similarly, you know, they're taking a huge portion of our entry feature on our side of the street here as well. That we've expressed concerns about this, you know, them taking up so much land, and they pretty much said, so what, we're just going to do proper teamwork. And so, Signal, in my opinion, I think would work better here. It would take less property. It would allow the individuals from the side streets to get in and out safely, and I just think it will function better.
Comment, questions for Mr. Yearsley? Mr. Yearsley, you've got your entrance into the subdivision. Who would have the next discussion?
Excuse me?
Who would you want to have the next discussion?
So what I'm looking for is if the commission is acceptable of my request, just to send a letter, to make a recommendation to the city council, send a letter to HHD with these concerns.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Steed?
a question regarding timing. I'm a little confused. The Ped Crossing question, that project is out to bid?
Just about there, Mr. McClure said.
And the Roundabout project is where? In it?
It's up the street, it's with
No, not physically, on the calendar. Timing-wise.
It's bid together. It's one project.
So it's out to bid as well?
No, not currently. No, it's on the 90-day bid list, so this project, the whole mile is going to be widened, and these intersection improvements and whatnot are going out to bid.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, I'm still confused. The Ped Crossing that we had in front of us, I thought someone said that one was out to bid.
It's just about to go to bid.
They're wrapping up 100%, so they're at 99% with their PS&E is getting ready to be put on the street for bidding here. It's on ACC's 90-day bid list.
90-day bid list, okay. I'm just questioning whether or not there's time for us to do anything.
Yeah. And so the question is, does he take his question directly to ACHD, or does he say, can we ask the city to look at this further?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's important to give at least the benefit of the commission as to at least how we got here today. Mr. Yearsley, I know, has had some conversations with Mayor Simison, and he and I spoke a couple of weeks ago following a meeting with the mayor. And Mr. Yearsley was kind of asking for where we thought the next step should be. Should he come to the council directly through our public comment period? And as I was thinking, I guess I had Commissioner Lancaster in the back of my head and a couple other commissioner members, you know, again, being real vocal about the desire to be more active in these types of things. And so I think Mr. Yearsley's here in part of my recommendation to at least put this in front of the Transportation Commission first. And I think Mr. Yearsley recognizes, they've heard from staff and the mayor that we're a little past where we maybe would like to be, but nevertheless, I thought it was important to have this issue be brought before you for any recommendations you would want to make to the city council.
And I apologize for coming at this late notice. I've been fighting this battle since day one. I've gone to the HHD chairman, Malone. I've talked to the project manager, and I've gotten no traction. And it wasn't until a while ago that someone said, go to the city, Meridian may not be able to help. So that's why I've been reaching out to the city for at least some
Understood, Mr. Yearsley. And my question is if there's someone out there that would review this or take a further look at it, and if that it appears to be, by definition, the next step would be city council, just to take another look at this in broad, and I'm not suggesting to reopen any decisions that time may have run on. If you're simply saying, would somebody else listen to this, that's an easy ask, I think. Commissioners, is that how you see it? Mr. Hopkins.
Concerning the code violation on encroaching on these properties, Caleb, does the city of Meridian, weigh in on that piece?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Hopkins, I missed the first part of your question.
Well, he was talking about the setbacks on which would be the southeast corner, I believe. That's the southeast corner.
Northeast and southeast, and improvements in the subdivision as well. So, yes and no. So we're always improving with ACHD. Tuscany's been there for long enough now where we weren't planning for a roundabout at this location. We wouldn't have thought back in 2000 that this would be a roundabout intersection. So the right-of-way that was preserved through the subdivision and the Kingsbridge subdivision and all the subdivisions didn't envision a roundabout. So you end up with a non-conforming setback, landscape buffer, and all those things. We do comment from time to time, and just quite frankly, and I know we're running late on time, we get frustrated because we preserve to a current plan, and then ACHD changes the plan in 15 years, and now we're left with this. Locust Grove is a good example, just 1 mile over. Those people's backyards are going to be in the road, almost quite literally, because it went from a 3-lane roadway to a 5-lane roadway. And so we're getting better, but we don't say, don't do the project because it's supposed to be a 25-foot wide buffer and there's only 20. That happens all the time. Meridian Road, once you go north of Cherry, all those properties are non-conforming. So we try the best we can, but it's a moving target, and we plan today for something that's 20 years down the road, and we miss it almost 90% of the time. So we usually don't bring it up here and go, we just acknowledge it as a non-conforming setback. That property owner is still vested with their home. It doesn't mean, if it burns down, they can't rebuild it, those types of things. But it's definitely concerning. I mean, it is. It's a concern, but we don't comment on the design as far as, it's supposed to be a 10-foot setback and now it's 8.
And my concern a lot of that is too, is as they come around that corner, they're gonna get, at night, they're gonna get lights in the backyard, in their house, they're gonna have a lot of sound, there's no sound barriers, just a vinyl fence. I mean, it is a huge impact, those two neighbors, and even our neighbors on the other side with them turning that circle, where a signal wouldn't take nearly as much room. They could make it a signal with not taking, we wouldn't have to widen much beyond the 5 lane D. You'd already have a center turn lane. So signal would actually preserve a lot of that right of way and not be required.
Mr. Chairman,
Second.
so do they take that into consideration, ACHD, on the?
So yes, to some degree, their right-of-way agents factor that in, and if they get too close, they can't do full taking for certain properties, and then there's a whole, I don't know how to figure it out. So that is something, though, that largely is on to figure out. We're getting too close, where when we go to negotiate that purchase of that property, they're going to have to take this case, or we need to do a full take. If I can, and again, Mr. Chair, just a mea culpa on my part, we're going to do better. We got Miranda now. We're going to bring these ACHD capital projects. We talked about it with Subcommittee. We're going to bring these to you earlier, right? Mr. Yearsley mentioned it. This is not a new topic. His neighborhood has been actively involved with ACHD, and some people like it, some people don't. And it hasn't been, to this point, it hasn't been really a question for the commissioners. ACHD has their own problems. They take public involvement comments, and as Brian mentioned, we brought up some similar concerns to ACHD traffic engineers. We said, hey, are you sure this looks a little wonky? But we didn't bring it to you to say, hey, is it okay that we ask these questions of the engineers? So, in hindsight, I wish a year ago we would have said, hey,
come to the Transportation Commission, so again, in retrospect, I should have done that. Sorry, I didn't do that. We will do better. And, you know, Fairview is a good example, right? 30%. Just keep going. Let's see what issues are being yelled at. This one we have it. Yeah, I'll just stop it.
Mr. Chairman, as I said earlier, I'm in full agreement with Mr. Yearsley on the side path crossing issue. I have to respectfully disagree on the roundabout issue. I don't see the same problems. But that said, I'd be fully supportive of a motion from this commission to the city council to recommend that ACHD redo these ped crossings along in this project.
Is that a motion?
Yes, sir.
Is there a second?
Second.
Call for the vote.
Mr. Chairman,
Can we do
point
that?
of order. So I think,
Lancaster.
we need to have the opportunity to comment on the motion. Can we have that opportunity?
Okay. I got hung up on this last time around. Looks like you have an opportunity to comment, but I'm gonna call for the vote here. You got 2 minutes.
Well, in that case, I will ask that we, hold the motion, or, yeah, I would ask that Mr. Lewis hold the motion. It doesn't seem like this is, so there's urgency, but there's not, right? So these plans are gonna be produced. Mr. Yearsley, you know that. Mr. Lewis, you know that. It sounds like, you know, this has been vetted through several processes. I can't say that I'm all that familiar with what ACHD's public involvement process is, but the city has been involved. You know, Mr. Yearsley has been involved, and I appreciate you being here and your passion about these topics. And I appreciate Councilman Kavanagh for directing things through our commission. You know, I really don't see the ship turning on the roundabout. You know, like Mr. Hood has said, we want to be involved with things earlier, and they'll bring them to us. This one's not one of those, right? That ship has kind of sailed. As far as the pedestrian crossing, I'd be interested in more information from Mr. Martin, probably next month at this point. You know, there was mention from Mr. McClure about some standards for a multi-use pathway. I'd be interested in hearing more about that before I make a decision one way or the other. In reality,
We've got a motion and a second. The question is called for, and the motion is that City Council ask ACHD to review this. Did I get that right, Mr. Lewis?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Ask City Council to ask ACHD to review this, head crossing and the roundabout. Is that?
No, I did not mention.
It's the head crossing. Okay. All in favor of making that motion?
Aye.
Aye.
No.
Opposed? Nay.
No.
4-3.
I think you might need to do, Mr. Chairman, it might be wise to do a
Voice vote.
voice vote, yeah.
Lancaster, yes or no?
Nay.
Lewis?
Aye.
Hopkins?
Aye.
Ballard? Nay. Claire?
Aye.
Steed?
No.
Schlecky? I understand correctly. You got 4-3.
So,
Mr. Chairman.
You have some on the call as well.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Mr. McKinney?
I'm a no on this.
I didn't get that. Yes or no?
No.
I apologize. Let me look at my notes again.
Mr. Smith is also on the call.
Jared Smith?
Aye.
Okay, you got, I count, you got 9 commissioners. I have 5 yeas, 4 noes. Motion carries.
I had it the other way. Mr. Chair, you voted nay, is that correct?
Voted nay.
So I have Lancaster, Ballard, Steed, Lecky, and McKinney as no.
Lancaster, no. Ballard, no. Steed, no.
Lecky,
Claire, no,
Leck-
excuse me, McKinney, no. Is that 4 no's?
I was a yes.
he was good. Okay, I apologize.
I was counting no's. Lancaster, no. Ballard, no. Steed, no. McKinney, no. Yes. Lewis, Hopkins, Leclerc, Lecky, and Smith.
I have Commissioner Lecky's vote practice. I apologize. Thank you.
All right, motion carries. Okay. Commissioners, we're at, 5:47. The bylaws, we can get a 15-minute extension.
Mr. Chairman, I move we go till 6 p.m.
You're making a motion to go to 6 p.m.
Yes, sir.
Is there a second?
Second.
Call for the vote.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we'll go to 6. All right, integrated 5-year work plan. Mr. Hood, we can get there. Do we want to talk about September meeting status out of order and devote other time to that? Or
I'll try to do this just as quickly as I can, Mr.
all right.
This one is time sensitive. ACHD's asked for the city and everybody else's comments by August 21. So if we have any comments on the integrated 5-year work plan and we aren't going to be able to really run through it, we need to provide those. So I'm going to ask you to trust me a little bit, lean on me a little bit in this to let you know that you're over. There's nothing to me that looks suspicious here. The one thing in talking with the mayor's office, though, that I do want to daylight with you that I think we should talk about, is the 10-mile road corridor south of I-84. So there is a push. I think you all have been part of some of these discussions about looking for ways to fund the Linder Road overpass, and that being more important than some improvements maybe on South 10-mile road. So the question really to you, to just kind of cut to the chase, is would you be interested in making a recommendation to the city council that our comments on the integrated 5-year work plan basically say, we want to change our priority list from earlier this year and basically down a couple of projects on the 10-mile road. We don't think that's as south or as to the community as, say, a Linder Road project would be. So that's essentially the question for you. Request, if you will, is to provide comments saying, generally the 5-year work plan as well, but our previous priority projects, 10 miles south, right? So really, we were just joking. They're really not. That's not how the letter would read. So, and maybe I'll just stop there and again, let you know we have until August 21st to get any comments we have on this to HHD, and you're certainly welcome to participate as well in that process.
Mr. Lewis?
Mr. Chairman, I was looking at our project prioritization sheets, and this is page 105 in the packet today. Now, there are only 2 10-mile road south projects in our top 20.
Mm-hmm.
Number 6, Victory to Overland, and number 17, which is the intersection 10-mile Victory. And then anything that's outside the top 20, I don't pay much attention to because I don't get any bonus points from our previous discussions. And the Linder Road overpass is already at number 2. So I don't think that we're going to accomplish what is being asked of us by making changes to our priorities. Because we already have Linder Road overpass at 2. And the number 6 and number 17 projects are already programmed. and they're already designed. So I don't believe we need to do anything, in my opinion. That's all that comes.
Mr. Hood, does that square with your proposal? It's kind of out of order there. I called for Lewis, he's my go-to guy, if I can, with all due respect and compliments, that studies this. And,
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add, now, that was our list. I mean, how that gets put into the sausage into ACHD's list, you know, that's a whole different animal, but.
yeah.
But our input is restricted to our list and our bonus point process.
Okay.
So, what I'm saying is, I don't think we can do what we put the mayor's office on that's what we do. You see where I'm going with this?
Well, no, I'm a little confused, because if I heard Mr. Hood right, he wants Linder overpass to take, no. Right.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, I'm just going to interrupt there. It really isn't about the Linder Road overpass. It's more about 10 Mile, and to Commissioner Lewis's point, they have them programmed, and those projects being lower on the priority list to free up resources to do something else, like a Linder Road overpass. But that's not necessarily part of the. I don't disagree with your analysis. I am carrying the message forward to you. The request, if you will, and
I'm sorry, this is David McKinney. I just have one piece of input on this prioritization list, and I couldn't really clearly hear all of the discussion about the 10-mile issue, but I did read the notes about that, and I'm in favor of the South 10-mile projects being dropped a little lower in priority. One thing that I don't see high enough in priority in this, and this is after all of our previous discussions about this whole priority list, another one that has come up that's been mentioned to me, and I think it's worth considering, is that we have a high school being built out, the new Owyhee High School out north of Ustick Road, and yet we don't have Ustick Road improvements on the list going all the way out past McDermott, where the new high school is. And so in another year or two, we'll have a high school, which is a large traffic generator, opening near Ustick Road, when we've got 2 or 3 miles leading up to it that is still a 2-lane farm to market road and really substandard. So I'd like to see Ustick Road get more attention toward the west. And if lowering the priority of those 10-mile projects could allow for that, that's something I'd like to see considered.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lancaster.
I did have a comment I wanted to make, and I'll keep it short for time purposes, but, you know, we put quite a bit of time into prioritizing these projects. We make recommendations to the city council. Those then go to ACHD. For us to now say, never mind, we didn't really mean that, seems disingenuous. You know, we're going to be at this again in 6 months. So any changes that we want to make again,
Okay, get a motion or a response to Mr. Hood?
Well, let's you know, if we need to make an action, that would be
Please do.
okay. So, Mr. Chairman, I move that prioritize projects as spring. So keep it as is, and we address any changes to that list.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. No recommendation to change our prioritization, Mr. Hood. Okay, we're at, September meeting. As discussed in the packet, typically in September, we do not a road show, but, we've taken tours,
Road trip.
gone out. The question is, do we want to, have a travel session, or sounds like we have some issues on our plate. Do we have a regular meeting in September?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would recommend that we hold a normal September.
Okay. And keeping in mind that that's September 14, in light of the Labor Day holiday.
14.
Yeah, 14, I'm sorry for the typo on your agenda. So that is not September 9, that is not a Monday.
Okay, so we would look at September 14 would be the next meeting of the Transportation Commission. Is that a motion, Mr. Lewis?
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Oh, sorry. Mr. Chair, this is administrative. You don't need a motion. It's
Okay,
done.
thank you. All right, we'll see okay, so we got the 14th. We'll be here. Mr. Leclerc, we're interested to get that organization. Staff communications, we got about a minute and a half, Mr. Hood.
So I will let the memo in your packet stand for itself, and if there's any questions or you want to talk about them, I take that back. Mr. Chair, you and I had a conversation a little bit about the CIP, and there's some information on the CIP in here, and the CICAC, which largely deals with the CIP at ACHD. Wow, that's a lot of...
Thank you for all those acronyms.
I'll make a brief comment, Mr. Hood. So members of the Commissioner, roughly a year ago, I was appointed to the Citizens Advisory Group to ACHD, and in the 5 meetings since then, due to my schedules, I've made a meeting and a half. I'm embarrassed that I haven't fulfilled my functions. It's a timing question. I do not like that. Truly, I feel embarrassed towards the city, and I've asked that I step down, and Mr. Hood and I discussed with someone else from the commission. This is an appointment by the mayor, but if there's a volunteer on this commission. Is that fair, Mr. Hood?
Mr. Chairman, which advisory committee at ACHD are you talking about?
Well, one in particular, they're studying the impact fees issue, and Mr. Hood is also appointed to that group. I apologize to the city that I have not been able to step up, and I know stepping away cost me some capital, but it's not fair when I can't show up. It's just a timing issue with my professional career right now. Mr. Hood and I had a conversation. Can I take it one step further and talk about or do we just ask for a volunteer?
You're the chairman.
What are the meeting time?
It's random, but it's like a 2:30 afternoon call, whether that's a Tuesday or a Wednesday. And you have people from ACHD, you have people from the city of Boise. It's a very good group. I'm going to embarrass myself by telling you that I just feel bad that I haven't been able to commit the time and answer the questions or answer the call. Mr. Steed.
I would be interested in that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Leclerc, do you have interest?
Yes.
Okay. So, Mr. Hood, anyone else, commissioners on the telephone? All right. You have 2 volunteers, Mr. Hood.
I will carry their names forward to the mayor. It's the mayor the kind of process in a nutshell is we nominate somebody, it has to go through ACHD's commission. They're the ones that actually, so we may need resumes from you gentlemen, because that's typically how it works at ACHD. They want to know who you are before they appoint you to, so I'll be in touch. I appreciate your interest. I'll talk to the mayor about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hood. Okay. See everyone on the 14th. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
See you on the 14th. Emily, can I chat with you a minute?
Who made the motion to adjourn?
That was me. I'm not sure who seconded it though.
Okay.
Oh,
You wing that one?
Never. You make it that far. Just a motion and then we're done.
Oh, so. Yeah.
Unless you and I can talk on the phone at some point here.